The arrival of the first humans. The stars stretched out into infinity, countless pinpricks of light that beckoned from the edges of the cosmos. Among these stars, in a distant corner of the universe, a small group of explorers drifted through the void aboard their sleek, silver vessel. The ship, known as Iskana, was a marvel of their civilization, built for journeys that spanned millennia. Its hull shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the nebulae and distant galaxies as they passed. For centuries, the crew of the Iskana had ventured through space, a group of highly trained individuals tasked with one purpose: to explore, to learn, and to observe. They were travelers from a far-flung world known as Roelis, a planet where technological and social advancements had far surpassed what humanity could imagine. The people of Roeliris had mastered space travel, genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence, all while preserving a harmonious society that lived in balance with their environment. Life, as they knew it, was governed by logic, reason, and an intricate web of systems designed to eliminate any inefficiency. Their mission had led them to countless other planets, some barren, some teeming with life, and others more alien than they could have imagined. But Earth? This small, unremarkable world circling an average star in the Milky Way galaxy was unlike any they had encountered before. It was a place where chaos reigned, where evolution had not yet fully taken its course, and where life flourished in unpredictable and beautiful ways. It was a world of contradictions, where primitive and advanced coexisted, each form of life struggling, surviving, and evolving in ways the explorers could scarcely comprehend. As they neared the planet, the crew grew quiet, each member absorbed in their thoughts. For many of them, this was the culmination of decades of preparation. Earth had been detected through long-range scans as a planet that could potentially harbor intelligent life, a species that might, in some distant future, emerge from its primitive stage and join the interstellar community. But no one could have predicted the feelings that arose within the crew as they began their descent into Earth's atmosphere. The blue planet, so vibrant and teeming with life, felt almost alive itself. It called to them in ways they couldn't explain. The leader of the expedition, Commander Lyra, stood at the front of the observation deck, her gaze fixed on the planet below. She was a tall woman, composed and poised, with the authority that came from leading many successful missions. Her long dark hair framed a face marked by years of experience, though her eyes, always calculating and methodical, seemed softer now. For the first time in her career, she felt a stirring of something deep within her, a curiosity, or perhaps something closer to awe. "We have arrived," she said, her voice calm, but there was an unspoken weight to her words. The rest of the crew assembled around her, all of them scanning the planet's surface, their instruments tracking the various forms of life below. The crew was diverse. Each member had a different specialty, ranging from biology to artificial intelligence to planetary sciences. Despite the team's wealth of knowledge, there was something undeniably humbling about the sight before them. Earth was not a place of perfect order, like Roelaris, but a place of chaos and beauty, raw and untamed. "We have been instructed to observe, not to interfere," Commander Lyra continued, her tone stern. "We will gather data, study the environment, and leave. Our presence here must remain undetected, but we must learn all we can. Understood?" "Understood," came the unified response from the crew. The landing was a delicate operation. Earth's atmosphere was thick with oxygen and nitrogen, and their ship needed to adjust its propulsion to match the planet's gravity. For a civilization that had long mastered gravity manipulation, this was a mere formality, but the team still worked in perfect synchronization, ensuring the vessel would touch down without causing any disruption to the world they were studying. With a soft, almost imperceptible hum, The Iskana descended through the clouds. From the observation windows, the explorers could see the curvature of the planet beneath them, a vast expanse of blue oceans and green land masses. A patchwork of forests, deserts, and mountains stretched across the horizon. It was a sight that took their breath away, despite their long history of traveling to countless planets. The sheer variety of life below them, both in the air and on the ground, seemed so rich and untamed compared to the sterile, ordered environments of Roalaris. They landed on a plateau near the edge of a dense forest. The ship's landing pad settled gently into the earth, creating a soft tremor in the ground beneath them. The crew gathered their equipment, preparing to make their first foray into the unknown. "I will lead the first team," Commander Lyra said as she adjusted the seals on her suit. The outer layer was translucent, designed to protect the crew from Earth's atmospheric contaminants and microbial life, but it also allowed them to observe the world through clear visors. Her team was small, just 5 members including herself. They would be the first to step foot on this strange new world. The air outside was thick, humid, and filled with the scent of life. As they stepped from the ship, the temperature was warm, almost uncomfortably so, but Lyra didn't mind. The sensation of solid ground beneath her boots was grounding. The earth was alive here, in ways they hadn't yet encountered in the vastness of space. "What is that?" asked Dr. Kale, the expedition's lead biologist, pointing to a small, furry creature darting between the bushes. It had the shape of a terrestrial mammal, but its coat shimmered with iridescent hues that shifted in the sunlight. Lyra squinted, focusing her advanced sensors on the creature. It was fast, too fast for most sensors to catch. "New species," she murmured. "An adaptation to the local environment. We'll have to analyze it more thoroughly later." The explorers moved cautiously, their steps light as they ventured toward the forest's edge. The trees, unlike anything they had seen before, were enormous, their trunks thick and gnarled. Vines snaked down from the canopy, heavy with dew. The air was alive with the buzz of insects and the calls of creatures they could not yet identify. "We need to get a sample of the atmosphere," Dr. Merrick, the environmental scientist, said as he activated his portable analyzer. The oxygen content is higher than we're used to, but it's breathable. No immediate threats." "What about the fauna?" asked Lieutenant Riva, the team's weapons and security specialist. There was no real fear in her voice. The Iskana was equipped with defensive systems, and the explorers were well trained. But despite their knowledge, the unknown was always a source of tension. Lyra paused for a moment, her gaze scanning the horizon. "For now, we observe. We know nothing of what we're dealing with. Keep your eyes sharp." As they ventured deeper into the forest, they saw more life, strange creatures that scuttled through the underbrush, birds with feathers the color of fire, and insects that hummed in an otherworldly song. Everything seemed to pulse with energy, alive in a way that even the explorers, so used to the sterile environments of their own world, could not ignore. Every step they took seemed to reveal something new, something previously unknown. Eventually they came across a clearing. At the center of it, an object lay on the ground. A large, flat stone, surrounded by an intricate arrangement of smaller stones. It was an unusual sight, one that stood out starkly against the natural chaos of the forest. The team gathered around it, their curiosity piqued. "It looks deliberate," Dr. Kale said, crouching beside the stone. "Not natural. Some form of marking, perhaps?" Lyra bent down to inspect it more closely, her enhanced vision zooming in on the markings. They were crude, almost childlike in their simplicity. But there was a certain intention behind them. The markings appeared to be a pattern of some kind, symbols that didn't make sense to her. But they were clearly man-made, or at least made by something intelligent. "This is strange," Lyra muttered. "Primitive, but still. Something. We need to find the source." The exploration continued for hours as the team ventured deeper into the forest. It was clear that this world was rich with life. But they had yet to encounter what they had come for, the dominant species, the intelligent beings that inhabited this planet. But they had made their first discoveries: artifacts, primitive structures, and signs of intelligence. The question was no longer if humans existed on Earth, but where they were, and how they had developed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the team set up camp. They would analyze the data they had collected so far, and in the morning, they would begin their search for the humans themselves. But as they lay down to rest under the alien stars, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that their arrival on Earth would change everything. They had come here as scientists, as observers, but there was something about this planet, about the creatures that lived here, that made her wonder if Earth had something to teach them all, something that went beyond the boundaries of knowledge, something deeper than technology or logic. And deep in the forest, far from their sight, a pair of human eyes watched the explorers as they rested, unaware that the first true contact between their species and this new race had already begun. The encounter with primitive life. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, filtering through the thick canopy of trees like molten gold. The explorers awoke to the sounds of the forest coming alive around them, the rustle of leaves as the wind stirred the branches, the distant call of creatures unfamiliar to them, and the soft hum of insects weaving through the air. It was a symphony of life, but a life they had never truly known, so far removed from the clinical precision of their own world that Commander Lyra stood up from her bedroll, stretching her limbs and looking out over the dense expanse of the forest. Her team had rested little, their minds swirling with the data they had already collected, but the mystery of Earth was pulling at them, urging them to explore further. The previous day had left them with more questions than answers, and they were determined to find some of those answers. Despite the strange beauty of the place, the curiosity that ran deep within each of them had already outweighed any hesitation they might have had. Lara checked her portable scanner, which showed no unusual energy signatures. The area was pristine, untouched by any advanced technology that the explorers could detect. And yet, there had been the markings, a hint that something intelligent had left its mark on this world. The explorers' purpose was clear now. They would find the humans. It was time to venture deeper into Earth's wilderness. After a quick breakfast, they packed up their equipment, making sure to leave no trace of their presence. The technology they carried was state-of-the-art, designed to blend into the surroundings and leave as little impact as possible. Roalaris had long passed the need for physical footprints in the sand. Their civilization had developed ways to observe without disturbing. It was this quiet, efficient way of living that had brought them to this point, standing on an alien world, watching from the shadows, trying to understand what they had yet to fully grasp. The team set off, following a trail that seemed to lead away from the clearing where they had camped. The forest was dense, the path often obscured by thick vines and towering trees, but their advanced scanners allowed them to navigate with ease. As they walked, the team's senses heightened, every movement and sound analyzed with clinical precision. They were scientists, after all. Engineers, biologists, anthropologists. Every step they took was data. Every breath they drew part of a grand experiment. But it was hard to ignore the underlying sense of wonder as they moved through the forest. The world around them felt alive in a way their own planet never had. We should be getting closer, Dr. Kale remarked, scanning his bioreader. The patterns of life in this region suggest it's populated, though it's still unclear by what. I'm not sure if populated is the word I'd use, Lieutenant Riva said with a hint of sarcasm. She had always been more cautious than the others. It's more like a jungle, isn't it? Lyra chuckled softly. In the grand scheme of things, this planet is a jungle, no matter what we call it. Stay alert. As they pressed on, the explorers began to notice signs of life in a different form. Large, primitive creatures made their way through the underbrush, their large bodies moving with surprising grace for their size. Some were herbivores, chewing on leaves and branches, while others were clearly hunters, stalking their prey with a quiet intensity. The explorers stopped to observe, watching how these creatures interacted with their environment. These were not beings of intellect, but instinct. Beasts, shaped by the forces of evolution in a world where survival was the only rule. "There's so much biodiversity here," Dr. Kale commented, "yet it's all still so raw, no ecological balance in the sense we're used to. It's all a struggle for survival." "It's fascinating," Lyra said. "But remember, we're not here to study just the wildlife. Our objective is to find the humans. Let's keep moving." The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more they encountered. Strange, vibrant flora with colors they had never seen before. Trees with bark that shimmered in the sunlight, and fruits hanging from vines that seemed to pulse with energy. But still, there was no sign of the species they had come to find. The humans. Where were they? Around midday, the explorers entered a narrow valley, flanked on both sides by towering cliffs. The area felt eerily quiet, the usual symphony of life muted. The silence hung heavily in the air. Lyra raised her hand, signaling the team to stop. "Something's not right," she murmured. They all paused, their eyes scanning the landscape. The trees seemed to bend unnaturally, the underbrush thick with shadow, as though something was watching them. There was a stillness to the place, a tension that didn't belong in the natural world. They had encountered life in abundance everywhere else, but here there was a sense of foreboding. "I'm picking up some unusual heat signatures," Dr. Merrick said, analyzing his scanner. "It's not far. A group of life forms, large, but their behavior doesn't seem normal." Lyra motioned for the group to approach cautiously, their every step deliberate. They were close now. As they crept forward, they spotted movement in the distance, a cluster of figures, hunched over, walking on two legs, but with strange, awkward gaits. At first, Lyra couldn't believe what she was seeing. There, in the distance, were the humans. Though not as they had imagined, they were primitive, clearly not the highly intelligent beings the explorers had expected. Their clothing was simple, little more than animal skins draped loosely over their bodies. They carried rudimentary weapons, clubs and sharp rocks, tools shaped by hands that were not as refined as those of Roalaris's most basic engineers. They were much like the wild creatures the explorers had already encountered, beasts of survival, not yet masters of reason. The humans moved in small groups, speaking to each other in guttural tones, and their voices rough and unintelligible. They seemed unaware of the explorers' presence, focused on their daily routine and hunting, gathering, foraging. There was a certain primitive beauty to the way they moved, the way they interacted with their world, and their boatmen from outer space moving to Pittsburgh to meet them, the way they interacted with the world. It was nothing like the peaceful, logical civilization the explorers had left behind. "They're nothing like us," Dr. Kale whispered, his voice filled with awe. "No," Lyra replied, "but they're not without purpose. These humans have survived here for millennia. They must have something we don't yet understand." The team watched for several minutes, their minds racing as they tried to comprehend what they were witnessing. These humans were so different from the peaceful, harmonious world of Roalaris. They were crude, driven by instinct and need rather than reason and intellect, and yet there was something undeniable about their resilience. These humans, despite their primitive ways, had lived through the trials of nature, adapted to their world in ways that had allowed them to thrive in a place so hostile, so unpredictable. "There's something strange about their movements," Lieutenant Riva commented, observing the way the humans moved with such coordination, almost as if they were following an unspoken rule. It's as if they're part of a larger system, a society of sorts. Lyra nodded. Yes, there's an order to them, a kind of structure. It may be primitive, but it's still order. As the explorers continued to observe the humans, they began to notice something else, something they hadn't expected. Despite the roughness of their lives, there was a sense of community among them. The humans cared for each other, shared food, protected one another from danger. They might not have had language as the explorers understood it, but there was something powerful about the way they communicated, through touch, through gestures, through looks that conveyed volumes. They are social creatures, Dr. Kales said slowly, as if coming to a realization. They've developed complex social structures, just not in the way we thought they would. They're not so different from us after all. Lyra felt a stir of something she hadn't expected, an emotional reaction. She had come to this planet to study an alien species, but she hadn't anticipated the empathy that these humans would evoke. They were crude, yes, but there was a beauty in their simplicity, a raw beauty, untamed and unpolished, that spoke to something deep within her. We've been focusing too much on their technology, their intellect, Lyra said softly. But maybe we've missed the point. These humans, they live through connection, through emotion. Perhaps that's their greatest strength. The explorers continued to watch as the humans moved through their day. They interacted with the forest around them, using primitive tools to gather food, water, and materials. They seemed to possess an intimate knowledge of their environment, a relationship with the land that was entirely alien to the explorers. In their interactions, the explorers saw the bond of family, the understanding of shared survival, and in these moments, something began to change within them. They began to see the humans not as primitive beings, but as something more complex, beings capable of profound empathy, creativity, and adaptation. But as the sun began to dip low in the sky, signaling the end of another day, Lyra knew their time was running out. Their mission was not to stay among the humans, but to study them and leave without interference. The explorers had seen enough to know that there was much more to these humans than met the eye. But they also understood that they were not here to change the course of Earth's history. A world on the brink. The forest's shadows grew longer as the sun began its slow descent, casting a warm, golden hue over the land. The explorers had gathered around their campfire, a small, contained flame that flickered gently in the cool evening air. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, high-pitched calls of insects, the distant rustling of larger predators, and the soft wind that whispered through the branches. The air smelled of earth and dew, rich and organic, a stark contrast to the sterile, calculated world they had come from. As they sat around the fire, their minds were filled with questions. The sight of the humans had changed everything. They were not what the explorers had expected, not in the way they had imagined. They were not the technologically advanced beings that Roalaris had hoped for. No, they were something different. Primitive, yet resilient, simple, yet full of potential. But there was something darker beneath the surface, something the explorers could not yet fully understand. There were signs, subtle hints in the way the humans moved, the way they interacted with their environment, that suggested something was coming. Commander Lyra stared into the fire, her thoughts lost in the flickering flames. She had seen countless planets in her travels, but none had left her with such a feeling of uncertainty. The humans were not yet aware of their presence. At least, they didn't appear to be. But the explorers had seen enough to realize that their mission was no longer just about observation. It was about understanding a species at the crossroads of something great. They were on the brink of change, of evolution, of something that could shape the future of their world. But they were also teetering on the edge of something dangerous, something destructive. "We need to talk," Lyra said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady but filled with urgency. What we've observed so far, these humans, they're not as primitive as they seem. There's something else going on, something more. The rest of the team turned to her, their eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and concern. Dr. Kale, the biologist, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Commander?" "Their behavior," Lyra said slowly. "There's a structure to it, an order that isn't immediately obvious. They're not just surviving, they're thriving in a way that seems almost unnatural. The way they work together, the way they communicate without language. It's like they're on the verge of something greater, something more." Dr. Kale nodded. "I've noticed it too. The way they interact with each other, their ability to work as a unit. It's as though they're operating under some kind of collective consciousness, but one that's entirely based on survival. It's different from what we've seen on other planets." "Exactly," Lyra said. "And there's another thing. The humans we've observed seem to be aware of their surroundings in a way that goes beyond instinct. They've learned how to manipulate their environment, use tools, adapt to the changing seasons, all without the kind of advanced technology that we take for granted. It's almost as if they're preparing for something." "For what?" Lieutenant Riva asked, her tone skeptical. She had always been the most pragmatic member of the crew. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Lyra took a deep breath. "I don't know yet, but there's a pattern. Yesterday, when we were watching the humans, I noticed something. They seemed to be gathering in larger numbers. The marks we found in the clearing, they were not just random symbols. They were a message, a signal. It's possible that they're preparing for some kind of event, an upheaval perhaps, something that could change the course of their entire civilization." Dr. Kale shook his head. "You're suggesting they're on the brink of some kind of evolutionary leap?" "Maybe," Lyra said. "Or maybe it's something more dangerous. I don't know, but there's something happening here, something we haven't figured out yet." The team fell silent, each member lost in their own thoughts. They had all come to Earth expecting to find a primitive species, one that might eventually evolve into something capable of joining the interstellar community. But what they had found instead was a species on the cusp of something greater. An enigma, full of promise and peril in equal measure. "What do we do now?" Lieutenant Riva asked after a long pause. "We observe," Lyra said firmly. "We continue gathering data, but we stay cautious. There's something happening here, and we need to understand it before we make any decisions." The team agreed, though they couldn't shake the feeling that their presence on Earth had already set something in motion, something they were not yet prepared to deal with. The next morning, the explorers set out again, this time determined to learn more about the humans they had encountered. They traveled deeper into the valley, moving carefully through the dense underbrush. As they walked, they discussed their observations from the previous day. "I think there's something to what Lyra said," Dr. Kale said, his voice thoughtful. "These humans, they're not just surviving, they're adapting, evolving. I can see it in the way they interact with their environment, in the way they use tools. They've mastered their surroundings in ways we didn't expect." "But they're still so rudimentary," Lieutenant Riva countered. "They're using tools, yes, but they're crude, basic, nothing like the technology we have. They may be on the verge of something, but they're not there yet." "That's the problem," Lyra said. "They may not have the technology, but they have something else. Something we can't quite explain. It's as if their evolution is moving at an accelerated pace, and they're starting to reach a tipping point." The journey through the forest was long, and the terrain grew more challenging with each passing hour. The explorers had to navigate through dense thickets, climb over fallen logs, and cross streams that flowed with clear, cool water. Despite the difficulty, they pressed on, determined to find answers. By mid-afternoon, they reached another clearing. This one was different from the others they had seen, larger, more open, with a scattering of rocks and piles of debris. The human group they had observed the previous day was gathered here. this time in greater numbers. They were sitting around a large fire, speaking in low voices, gesturing with their hands in ways that seemed deliberate, as though they were trying to communicate something important. Lyra motioned for the team to stay hidden, and they crouched behind a thick cluster of trees, their eyes trained on the group. The humans seemed to be in the midst of some kind of gathering, a ritual perhaps, though it was impossible to say for sure. They were sharing food, and some of them appeared to be passing around what looked like crude maps or diagrams, markings on pieces of bark or drawings etched in the dirt. The explorers could see the humans pointing to the sky, to the trees, to the ground, as if they were discussing something beyond their immediate surroundings. Dr. Kale squinted. "Are they planning something?" "It looks that way," Lyra said. "But what could they be planning?" The scene before them was a puzzling one. These humans, so primitive in their appearance and technology, were displaying signs of something greater, an awareness of their world that went beyond mere survival. It was as if they were preparing for something, and the explorers could not help but wonder what it was. The humans continued their meeting for several hours, speaking in hushed tones and gesturing fervidly. Lyra and her team observed in silence, trying to glean any useful information from the encounter. But despite their best efforts, they could not determine the purpose of the gathering. The humans were speaking in a language that they could not understand, their words alien and foreign, full of meanings that eluded the explorers. As the evening drew near, the humans began to disperse, returning to their shelters or moving off into the forest. Lyra signaled to her team, and they slowly and quietly withdrew from their position, retreating back into the cover of the trees. "What do you think they were talking about?" Dr. K asked as they moved away from the clearing. "I'm not sure," Lyra admitted, "but whatever it is, it's important to them. There's a sense of urgency in their actions. They're preparing for something. The question is, what?" As they made their way back to their camp, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that Earth's humans were standing at a precipice, on the brink of something momentous. But what? Were they evolving towards something greater? Something that could one day rival the technology and intelligence of the explorer's own world? Or were they, perhaps, hurtling towards something far more destructive, an inevitable conflict that would reshape the course of their civilization? For the first time since their arrival on Earth, Lyra felt a sense of unease. She had come to this planet to study a species, to observe and learn. But the more she saw, the more she realized that they were not merely passive observers. Something had shifted. They were no longer watching from the outside. They were part of the story now, whether they liked it or not. The mission was no longer just about data. It was about understanding a world on the brink of change, a world teetering between creation and destruction, and Lyra knew that no matter what happened next, they would never be able to look at Earth or the humans who inhabited it the same way again. The unraveling of time. The days that followed were filled with growing tension. The explorers had been on Earth for several weeks now, observing the humans in increasing detail, but each new discovery seemed to raise more questions than answers. They had started with an objective: study the primitive species, gather data, and leave without making their presence known. But now, that mission had become something else entirely. Earth was a world on the brink of transformation, and the explorers were now part of a narrative they had never expected. Commander Lyra had been unable to shake the feeling that something profound was happening here. Something was stirring among the humans, something beyond the immediate scope of their understanding. It wasn't just their strange social structure or their evolving ability to adapt to their environment, or even the subtle marks and symbols they had found that seemed to suggest the beginnings of written language. No, it was something deeper, a kind of energy, an undercurrent that ran through everything the humans did, a sense of destiny or purpose that none of them could yet explain. But it was becoming increasingly clear that Earth was not a simple, uninhabited world waiting for exploration. It was a world at a crossroads, And the humans? They were standing on the precipice of something far more significant than they could understand. The explorers had come to Earth expecting to find a species at the edge of something great, perhaps on the verge of discovering the secrets of the universe. But what they found was more complicated than that. Over the last few days, Lyra had noticed more disturbing signs. The humans' behavior had changed. Where once they had appeared to live in harmony with the land, moving in small groups and interacting with each other in simple, instinctual ways, now they seemed more agitated. They were gathering in greater numbers, more frequently, and their rituals had become more elaborate. There was an intensity in their movements, a purpose to their actions that made Lyra uneasy. The group had spent the last few days moving further from the forest, across open plains that stretched as far as the eye could see, following traces of the human population. They had found settlements, simple but organized villages nestled in the valleys, surrounded by crops, small animal herds, and primitive dwellings. The settlements were rudimentary by any measure, but there was a sense of pride in the way the humans maintained them, as if they were preparing for something far beyond the horizon. "I don't like this," Lieutenant Riva murmured as they watched a human group move through the settlement from their concealed position on a ridge. "These people are acting like they're preparing for a war, not just a gathering." "I've been noticing the same thing," Lyra replied, her voice low. "The urgency, the secrecy. They've been marking the trees, the rocks, almost as if they're preparing for something big. And those maps, they're not just directions, they're plans. They're charting something, a path, a route. And what if it's a route to what?" Dr. Kale asked, his brow furrowed as he observed the humans below. A new land? A conflict? A new form of technology?" Lyra stood up, her posture tense. "Whatever it is, it's something they're not sharing with us. We're not supposed to understand it, not yet. But I'm starting to believe we might not be the first visitors to this world." The mention of that possibility sent a chill down the team's collective spine. Could it be? Had the humans encountered other civilizations before? The thought seemed absurd, but the more they observed, the more certain Lyra became that there was more to this world than met the eye. That evening, as the explorers sat around their campfire, the subject of their next steps loomed large. The sky overhead was clear, the stars bright and distant in the cold night air. The group had begun to scan the surrounding areas for signs of human activity, but it seemed as if the humans were aware of their presence, more aware than they had been before. Every time they approached a settlement, they found that the humans had moved, vanishing into the forest, or concealing themselves in ways that suggested they knew they were being watched. "We're not getting closer to them," Lieutenant Riva said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Every time we get near, they vanish. It's like they know we're here." Dr. Kale adjusted his equipment. "It could be a coincidence, or it could be that they're becoming aware of our presence. They may be reacting to our scans, or maybe, just maybe, they have something we don't understand yet, something that allows them to track us." "We can't rule that out," Lyra replied thoughtfully. "But I don't think they've detected us directly. They've been behaving differently, yes, but I think there's more to their movements than just fear of detection. It's almost as if they're being, pushed?" Riva asked, incredulous. "Yes," Lyra said, her voice quiet but firm. "I think something is urging them forward. It's like a wave of energy, a pull that's guiding them towards something, maybe something they're not fully aware of. And we've been watching them, studying them, but we're missing the most important question. Why are they moving?" Dr. Kell raised an eyebrow. "You think this is part of their natural progression? That they're being led somewhere?" "I don't know," Lyra admitted. "But we've been observing them for too long now to dismiss the signs. There's an intelligence behind their actions, something more than simple survival instinct. They're not just moving through the forest or gathering food. They're preparing for something." The conversation fell into a heavy silence as each member of the team pondered the implications of what Lyra had said. If the humans were being led toward something, they would need to find out what that was. But every new path they followed seemed to be a dead end, and every village they encountered had been abandoned long before they arrived. "I think we're too far out of the loop," Riva said, breaking the silence. "Maybe we need to go back to where we started, go to the clearing where we first saw them. That's where they seemed most organized. Maybe it's a clue." Lyra nodded. "That's a good idea. Let's retrace our steps. We'll return to the clearing and see if we can learn more about where they're going, but we need to be careful. Something's different now, I feel it." The journey back to the clearing took longer than expected. The explorers had ventured far from the place they had first encountered the humans, and retracing their steps through the dense forest was no easy task. But despite the challenges, they pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency that none of them could ignore. The closer they got to the clearing, the more tense the atmosphere became, as if the world around them was holding its breath. By the time they reached the clearing, it was nearing dusk, and the sky was painted with hues of red and orange. They cautiously approached from a distance, careful to remain out of sight. When they finally emerged from the trees and gazed upon the clearing, they found that it was completely different from how they remembered it. Where once there had been only a few scattered humans, now there was a large group, gathered in an organized circle. They were speaking in a low hum, a chant almost, and the air around them seemed charged with an electric tension. Lyra motioned for the team to remain quiet, her eyes fixed on the humans below. There was no doubt in her mind now that something extraordinary was happening. They were on the verge of something, and the energy in the air was palpable. It was as if the very fabric of time and space was bending around them, pushing them towards something that was both familiar and alien. "They're preparing for something," Dr. Kale whispered, "but for what?" Lyra's gaze never wavered from the humans. She felt it now, the subtle pull, the wave of energy that was guiding them. It was not unlike the feeling she had experienced when encountering an unknown force on other worlds, an intelligence that reached beyond the natural, beyond the known. And then, as if in response to their presence, the humans stopped their chant. They turned in unison, their eyes locked onto the explorers as though they had been waiting for them all along. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, she felt the weight of their actions, the gravity of what they were about to do. They had come to study, to observe, but now it seemed that Earth was no longer the passive subject of their mission. They had crossed a line. The humans had seen them. And it was then, in that moment of realization, that Lyra understood. Their arrival on Earth was not just a coincidence. It was the beginning of something far greater, something they were not prepared for. The humans were not just moving toward something, they were moving toward them. The wind rustled through the trees, and the night grew still as the humans stood in their circle, eyes now fixed upon the explorers. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. The explorers knew they had no choice but to face whatever was coming, but none of them knew what it would be. The world had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again.